So this is our panel on queerness and tabletop gaming. Uh, I guess I'll introduce myself, and I'll let our other host, our other panelists do that as well. I'm Taylor Shuss. I'm the designer of Stonewall Uprising, um, and my pronouns are he and him.
I'm Amabel Holland. Pronouns are she, her. I'm the one of the two ladies that owns Hollandspiel, and I've done, I don't know, 70 games.
Yeah, when I wrote the description for this panel, I was like, which of Amabel's games do I mention? And I just wrote a couple that came to mind.
That's
Because
fair.
it was funny, because a part of me was tempted, like, do I ask Amabel if she really cares? I don't think she does.
Not really.
So I thought that was kind of funny, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll get into it. It's just us for today because Joe Kelly had to drop out. But that's fine. It'll just be a chill conversation, and then at the end there might be some questions if we have time. If you have questions, I suggest you throw them in the little text chat or something, or we could even do a voice thing later. I'm not, we'll see what happens. Um, let's see. I think one of the things that's really been on my mind about queer games broadly, that's like really been like scratching at the back of my head is like how we define a game that's queer versus a game that's not, right? Like where's the line? What does that mean? I'd love to hear your take, and I have how I feel, but it's just how I feel. I don't think there's a definite answer to a question like this. I'm not sure there ever will be.
I also agree that there's not really a definite answer. I definitely feel, at the very least, I'm more interested in games that try to engage and express meaningfully queerness. And I'm still trying to figure that out because, like, so you've done a game that's queer. I really haven't yet. I intend to. I am working on some, but you know, you'd be hard pressed to go through my back catalog and try to find expressions of queerness. And I think part of the problem with that, of course, is that I came to understand and accept my queerness only very recently. It's only been about 3 years. You know, going back quite some time, I definitely was aware at a young age that there was a difference, for example, between being straight for girls and being gay for girls, and I was the second one. And I had a strong pull towards like queer culture and community and people, but because I didn't have the language to describe myself, I didn't know I was trans and a woman. Those feelings had a lot of confusion and distress and then shame tied up in them that didn't really resolve until my egg cracked, until I figured out that I was trans. So I'm now at a place where I'm like, okay, so how do I do that? How do I actually express my queerness in games? And I have a couple games that I'm working on, for that. But I'm still trying to figure out, and this is part of why I'm excited to be on this panel and have this conversation with you because you have done it. So what are your so your turn. You
So
answer your question.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot you said and a lot I want to respond to. I'm just I tend to talk over people just so I'm trying not to on purpose.
Mhm.
But I'm of two minds. Part of me feels like there has to be some level of the creator there. Um, but I think what I'm really aching over, what I'm really struggling with, is a question that goes into this, which is like, do you have to be queer to make a queer game? And what I mean by that is a lot of the games that I would call queer almost maybe are more like punky or transgressive, and a lot of your work falls into that, especially your more
Like,
political work. Um, and that's where like there's some questions here that I want to say out loud. I'm not asking. I'm just thinking out loud with them, right? So if you're a queer person and you make a given game, does that game immediately queer? I'm not sure it is, right? Like if I made Castles of Burgundy, right? Like if I was the designer of that game, would that become a queer game like that? I don't know. I mean, I guess it would have my spin on it, but broadly, I have a hard time saying yes to that.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, that also begs the question: can a cis het person make a queer game? And that's not just with aesthetics or theme. That's probably with the broader kind of vibes that I imagine, which are broadly that, like, when I think about what queer games do and what they are doing broadly, the one thing that I keep coming back to, the one thing that I keep hitting on, is the idea that it's questioning things that are typically unquestioned. And what I mean by that, to explain it more broadly, is how in a game, I mean, in a game like Stonewall, right? You have you have pride in the man, and the man does these terrible things. And the game, through its play, the entire design of that game is designed to make you feel bad doing everything as the man. That is the point. Every time I hear players tell me they feel nauseous or awful or evil playing that side, that's a win. That's the art in the game speaking to you. That is not like random happenstance. That's on purpose. We worked really hard with our artist for the man, and the verbiage in that game is constructed in a very specific way to tell players, no, this is not a positive thing you're doing. You winning should make you feel bad. You taking actions should make you feel like a bad person. And I've noticed a lot of games that I would describe as queer or like queer adjacent. Again, that it's fuzzy. Have you asking questions like, am I the bad guy? Like, am I doing something bad? And I think that's something that I've been really thinking about. A number of your games echo that, Amabel, like This Guilty Land, notably. But also, I think about other games. Like I have The Cost over there. The Cost makes me think of something similar, right? Yeah, now, I don't know if the designers of The Cost are anywhere in that wheelhouse, but that's one thing I've noticed about a lot of these games, where they talk about a topic, but they queer the discourse. They alter, they skew it in a way where it makes you rethink it because it's been reframed, which, is, to be honest, I would consider a very queer thing to do,
Mhm.
because that's what being queer is like in a lot of ways. It reframes your standard nonsense. I mean, it's still there, but oh look, everything's slightly different in a way that maybe makes people uncomfortable. Well, great.
Oh, I agree. There's that famous bell hooks definition of queer is not being about who you sleep with, but having a self that is at odds with everything around it. And that's something I feel very strongly, actually. And I think a lot of what attracts me to queer art, even before I understood myself to be queer, was uh, this sense of going against the grain and of having to kind of carve out a space for yourself and questioning what's around us in the systems of power.
Yeah, and
Because that's the basic fact of queer existence.
yeah, I think your point about questioning systems of power. I mean, that just a constant struggle in the modern day. In the past, I know it has also been a big struggle, but it's not been well documented for a ton of reasons, whether in the recent past or the long past. Um, and that is just going to be a theme, because those are the kind of struggles that you see. Um, that you see with queerness and people who are queer and historical queer people. I mean, this is a historical event. I did not make this panel specifically about history, but I know it's a lot of what we'll be talking about. Um, I don't know what a sci-fi queer game would be like. I'd sure like to see one.
Well,
But
I'm working on two of them, so
hell
I
yeah,
guess.
ah, hell yeah. Um, and yeah, stuff like that I want to see. It doesn't all need to be about what has happened, and I think that mindset could be used to make some really cool art, which I'm excited to see what you're working on, Annabelle. Um,
Thank you.
so Yeah, but I agree. It's going to be about overcoming oppression and like 80% of at least for now. While again a lot of society is still coming to grips with how they feel about it and why they're wrong typically. And then you have and then you have the rest of us who are like, okay, hurry up, come on. And then we're working on art to support that and to show people, hey, this is our argument in as a piece of art. And that's how I view a lot of queer games. But again, I would be hard pressed to say that none of your games are queer. Again, that's just my opinion.
No,
Um,
I appreciate that, and that actually makes me feel a little bit better about it, because I've come to it so late,
mm,
Um, but, yeah, and coming back to your question of, could, like, a cishet person make a queer game? Um, I'm thinking also of, like, the fact that traditionally, a lot of stories of queer people have not necessarily especially for, like, think about, like, film, for example.
oh yeah,
Uh, there are films made about queer people, about trans people all around the spectrum, and it's usually cis straight people telling our stories and not necessarily telling them with the accuracy and texture that would be helpful to queer people. They're films made for cis audiences, straight audiences generally, to try to, well, to help with the argumentation, come and accept us, please.
yeah,
Um, but that actually, does not necessarily resonate with all queer people. Certainly, as a trans person, a big part of the problem I had in figuring out that I was trans was that the stories I had about being trans were stories written by people who were not trans and did not actually understand the experience or had a very surface level understanding, and so I couldn't identify myself with that. And I think with queer art, I definitely want to see more things that have first representation, like mirrors in which to observe oneself and let you know who you are. I think that's tremendously important.
sure.
And then also I really see I almost just prefer queer art for queer people, you know? Like
Mm.
that's my audience more for anything queer that I'm trying to work on rather than the broader public because I'm thinking of there was a romantic comedy that I saw 2-3 years ago. It was cute. It was with Kristen Stewart, and it was like a holiday thing. She was coming home with her girlfriend, and there was a film critic who said this felt like a queer romance made for straight people. It's, you know, and I think that's something to.
uh,
I think that's my. I think it's very important to do the work that addresses the broader public and creates empathy and understanding. I'm just not interested in doing it myself. I'm interested more in talking directly to like other queer people with the games, which is why it's been very interesting to see how when they're done, how they are received.
oh
You
yeah,
know, um, because so I'll talk briefly about one of them.
yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
So I'm doing a game about giant monsters beating the snot out of each other, and I'm using it because I love Godzilla, I love Gamera,
Yeah,
all that,
hell yeah.
and the number of queer and trans people that I've talked to who for whom like that was like a big thing for them as kids. And I think it's because the I actually wrote a thing about that went live this morning.
Yeah, I saw the link to that, but I didn't have time to read it.
Yeah, that's okay. It's a bit, but it's I think you can use them as a metaphor for queerness, especially in that kind of bell hook sense, in that and um, the sense existing in a society that is necessarily built for you and that understands you. And so I'm trying to use that game, this kaiju battle game, as a way to explore queerness and especially explore like self discovery and
Mm-hmm.
acceptance, which were very important parts of my figuring myself out. Um, and it's also kind of a legacy game. Like there are
Oh,
unlockables. And here's the thing, it's Hollandspiel. So what I'm gonna have to do is I'm getting these little envelopes and I'm sorting the cards and bits that go in each envelope by hand. I'm going to hate it. I don't Why am I doing this to myself? I'm doing it because it's something that's meaningful to me, right? And I put a lot of money into it because it's meaningful to me. And if no one else likes it, I guess that's okay. I hope they do. But I like to try to express queerness, queer community, and kind of self evolution, self discovery through this lens. And so that's to be very. I'm very interested to see how it's received. But that's that thing I'm working on.
I mean that sounds rad to me. I'm very big into kaiju stuff myself. Um, and even if all the Gamera movies haven't all aged perfectly,
Oh
um,
no, the Gamera movies are mostly terrible. I
yeah,
love them, but they're terrible.
yeah, that's how I feel. Um, but but no, that sounds pretty stellar, and I like you're talking about the kind of kaiju stuff through a queer lens is really interesting because of the discovery of the self and not fitting in, and it all works troublingly well with what you're talking about. Um, that'll be really cool to see. I gotta say, I'm
Thank you.
excited for that. Um, I guess on my end, uh, you know, I'm really torn about the question of cishet people making queer games. Going back to that,
Mhm.
I don't know. Part of me feels like, well, I mean, if you do the research and you really get into it, sure. I mean, like, who am I to gatekeep any of that? I mean, more art like that is hard to say no to. But on the other hand, um, I can see the argument. This is like our corner. I'd like, like I want to make sure it's all awesome, perfect stuff. But of course, that's not going to happen, even if it's just queer creators.
Oh
You're
yeah.
not going to like every game in your niche for sure. That's just unreasonable. Um,
Oh, absolutely. And I'm on Twitter. I know what queer discourse is like. Like no one agrees on anything.
yeah, and so I I mean, broadly, I mean, I guess, if it just falls in that umbrella, that's just gonna happen. And that's just standard stuff. I mean, of course, no one's gonna agree on everything. I'm not expecting or wanting that. It's not even remotely. Um, but, uh, but I guess within our magic realm, our magic circle, so to speak. Uh, you know, I mean, it might just have to be a case by case thing where it's like, okay, well, you really put in the work, you put in the time, hell yeah, and then you just slapped on a pride flag.
Yeah.
That's I don't know, like, it's just, there's two levels. Like, I know anyone can use the pride flag, and that's part of makes it really rad. That's what makes a lot of the pride flags really rad to me. But it doesn't mean that you can just throw it on one thing and be like, oh, my area control game is now about the Stonewall riots and the Stonewall uprising, and you go, ah.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I mean, it's like I mean, with any kind of art, it's always a case by case business basis and like a personal litmus, and it's
that
tricky. Yeah.
that is true. Um, yeah, that is true. One thing I want to talk about as well is about how I feel like we're seeing maybe the precipice. It's hard to say because this is not only a designer question, but like a broader publisher question, which is a harder thing to knock at. Although you could speak more than I can. Although your
Mhm.
company is, of course, not typical in that regard. Um, I think for the best, but that's just
Yeah.
where I
Thank you.
am. And I feel like with your games, with Sacred Band possibly coming out, which is my a game of mine with
Mhm.
Joe Schmidt about the Sacred Band of Thebes, and then you have like Molly House from Joe Kelly, um, and even Persuasion by Zoe Allred. you have a number of queer games kind of on the horizon, right? That are being
Mhm.
talked about more openly, and it feels like, and maybe this is just because the announcement by Whirligig, um, maybe just because I'm talking to you, but it feels like there's just like we're on a precipice of I don't want to say an explosion, that feels a little hyperbolic, but just a lot more than typical, right? A lot more than it has been. Whereas prior, I can't really name a ton of games like this, and then all of a sudden it's like boom, big bang, like boom, the Cambrian explosion of queer games.
Well,
um,
it's certainly been a bigger thing in, like, the TTRPG space, but in board games, yeah, it's relatively it feels like there's a lot coming, and actually, that Whirly Egg announcement is a big part why I definitely wanna get more queer games out there. I feel like I need to catch up, you know? Like, what am I doing if I don't
I mean, you take your time when you need to. I mean, there's no
Mhm.
rush. I think, the hard part about art, which I'm sure you're wildly aware of. So I feel like I'm telling someone this that knows way more than I do. But it takes time to make good art. It takes time to percolate and to sit in the hopper for a while to really make sure that it's singing. Um, so I wouldn't stress that at all. That I mean
Yeah,
that
well, I still
with
wanna get more out there.
with your ludography, I'm not concerned about you making games. I'll put it that way.
Okay, that's fair. I don't know. I don't work as quickly as I used to. Because here's the thing, back before I figured myself out, I really just did not want to sit with myself or
Mm,
think about myself. So I just
sure.
put myself into that's why I got so many games out, right? So I am working a bit more slowly these days. I also have other things distracting me, which I think is obvious from my Twitter.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, whatever. I no judgment here. I
Oh,
don't mind.
no.
Yeah, it's and then I wrote a question about this and then I forgot about it and then I was reminded because of what Travis Hill is saying in the chat about how as a cishet guy he wouldn't feel comfortable designing a queer game, even from the boundary pushing role playing games, which his role playing games are very cool actually.
Yes, I
Um,
I I have a few of them. Yeah, they're great.
and it is interesting because you brought this up as well, Annabelle, about how the tabletop role playing game world, there's a lot more like openly transgressive and angry kind of queer and maybe not so angry. I'm not sure about all of it. It's a wide world out there.
Mhm.
Um, Role playing games that are focused on that, and it is interesting how because those are my speculation. I'm curious if you agree or not. Is that because it's like one person working on that, because it's like a one person job mostly, and maybe there's an artist, maybe those stories get told and they get told in like a gritty punky way. And then here with the bigger publishers, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, and so things get watered down, things get set to the side and really toned to kind of make it more milk toast for a broader audience. I'm curious if you think that's more or less right, or if maybe you disagree with me.
I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with larger publishers, so it's harder for me to say that, but it definitely feels like we're not getting that kinda punk rock aesthetic, that kinda zine culture queerness, in games put out by larger publishers. And certainly it seems like when you have less people to tell you no, you are more likely to do what you want to do with the thing and express yourself, more fully. There's certainly a freedom that I feel like I have, and I'm trying to take more advantage with, and trying to encourage other people to do. There's a designer that we published once before, Aaron Escobedo, who did Meltwater, and
Yeah.
so the thing about Erin is that she saved my life. She's a
Oh.
big reason why I figured out who I was, um, and like there's certainly I've been talking with her about the kind of games that she wants to make going forward and how she wants them to have this kind of very gritty punk rock queer feeling. And hopefully, think something will come of it. And certainly, we're the publisher she has in mind for that stuff because in doing like really angry, abrasive, aggressive queer art. because, I want that. I want more of that out there. That's something that I respond to. And I don't know if a lot of other publishers, especially larger publishers, necessarily are going to be like, "Oh yeah, we want this kind of feel and vibe to it," you know? So I
Sure.
think
Yeah.
I think you're right there. I think, I think it's probably also a concern about, like, the marketplace. Because
Oh yeah.
here's the thing, I never have to think about that. As long as I sell X number of copies, and X is a very small number, I will be in the black.
Sure.
I am basically guaranteed any game we release to sell that number of copies, as long as we don't put too much into the art, which is why I'm a little nervous about this kaiju game, but, we'll see. Um, so, like, I am able to take those chances. I don't need to care about, can I sell 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 copies of this?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas another publisher would have to, So I understand that, the realities of a physical product, whereas with a TRPG, a lot of them are sold, either books on demand from the smaller publishers, or they're like PDFs that you download, and that's really, you have a lot less to look at there as far in terms of, how do we store and ship this, etc.
Yeah, I know that. I've pitched and talked to a number of mid to large size publishers over my time. Um, not always very successfully, but I've sure done it. And that the conversation about how can we make sure this sells X thousand copies, or how would you retheme this? Um, isn't terribly uncommon. It's not easy to retheme something totally. It's not done willy nilly. It is a total pain to just go back and redo all that, even if your game
Hmm.
is pretty clean and straightforward theme wise. But yeah, you can definitely feel the kind of um, the cooks in the kitchen issue, where you see this happening and then the theme changes, and then it just gets, it loses something, and usually it's not like a queer game. Usually it's much more milk toast to begin with. But I cannot imagine having a game like Stonewall, or a lot of the games you've worked on that are more socially focused, or angry, so to speak, um, and then having that change at all. I mean, that's one thing with Stonewall. I
Oh,
was
yeah.
I was I couldn't do. I
Yeah.
there's just no way you could change that theme as is, and I was pretty adamant about it. And I'm sure that's why a number of publishers turned me down,
Mm.
because they saw that and they're like, "Wow, this game's kind of angry."
Mhm.
And I know that people comment about the art and they're like, "Wow, it seems like you don't want these people as customers." And I go, "Yeah, it's not really their game. Like, I don't think they'd ever buy this game. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, and um, I remember having to ask our Pride artists to make some of our protesters and rioters look more angry. I was like, these queer people are too like happy-go-lucky. Like, they're fighting for their rights. They aren't
Mhm.
just chilling and having a picnic. They're unhappy. They want to be treated equally. It's
Mhm.
it's not like a fun little, oh, we're gonna go march and then be like everyone else. No, they can't do that. This is their life. This is their livelihood. That's
Mhm.
why they're fighting so hard.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, yeah, and I definitely, yeah, see, this is something like back when, we announced This Guilty Land, for example, and we announced it like a year before it came out, because we were very conscious of the fact that we need to be very careful about the game, and also how we talked about the game, how we framed it as what it was and what it was not. And, there are people who are like, "Why don't you just retheme it?" And it's like, well, we're telling this story. We're making a game that has a point and is expressing something. And I think that's something you run into, especially like in the more Eurogamey spaces, where like they don't really see games as, I'm getting myself in trouble. They don't see games as art that's capable of expressing something. They see it as a commercial product. And so for them, it's be easy enough to retheme it, and it's abominable, frankly. And I can't imagine, trying to make a living off of an art form and then not seeing it as art and seeing it as interchangeable, that you can just switch the point that you're making and the story that you're telling. And it's important to stick to those stories, or the stories that are worth telling. You know, and yeah, I think definitely there's that question of will it sell 5,000 copies or whatnot. Like I haven't been a freelance designer for a long time. I haven't had to pitch to anyone for a long time, other than like convincing Mary, who co-owns the company with me. Like, can I do a game on this? Yeah, sure, do a game. And she doesn't really stop me. Every once in a while, I do a dinosaur game for her, and she's fine. But like, there's no way I could have pitched Nicaea, for example, the game that came out a couple years ago.
Sure.
There's no way any publisher, any like large traditional publisher would have touched that.
Yeah, I would find that would be hard pressed to disagree there. I mean, I maybe, but you're definitely a lot more likely to have something like that happen when
It wouldn't leave in my jokes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be stuff like that. I feel like can also really kill a lot of the core ideas when they really tame it down. And you're like, but my jokes, that's part of the experience, is seeing that. Yeah, that would be a real shame, actually. That would really be a bummer. I'm just sad thinking about it now. Well, I'll be honest, I didn't have a lot of other questions planned.
Okay.
To be fit, but we have a lot of people in the chat actually.
Okay.
Who are pointing out some interesting things. I really like what Cleo said about how there are Cleo says that there are 3 levels of queerness in a game. There are ones where it's front and center, like my game or Molly House. There's ones where there's a couple small details, think like your Dead of Winners and your Eldritch Horror, right, where there are queer people and they exist, but they aren't really impacting anything else. They're
and
maybe
it's nice to see, but it's not necessary.
Yeah, like when I see that, I go, "That's neato." And I'm not angry, and usually it doesn't feel too prepandery. I when it feels natural, which I'll grant is a hard spectrum to hit because it's it's all on cardboard, and how is someone gonna read it, and da da da. It's not easy. I get that, but I do appreciate it being in there. And it could always be, it doesn't always have to be 2 guys or 2 girls. There's a lot of ways you can have a queer. A lot of ways you can be queer.
Yeah.
So as you certainly know, and then of course there's the last one. They say is the meso level, where queerness is influencing the game subject and the mechanisms in some way mixed with non-queer influences. And it's interesting because depending on how you define a lot of this, what is a non-queer influence? Will we ever really know a lot of that stuff? A lot of people have, were and are closeted for long periods of time and don't publicly announce any of that stuff. They aren't public people, and that's totally fine. That's not, I don't want to pry any doors open. But it is interesting to ask, what is, a non-queer influence? Like, where does that begin? Where does that end? Like, if I'm Joe Straight Man or whatever, like is that not queer? Was my life not influenced by queer people, which is a laughable idea? I mean, really, I actually don't know. I really don't know how any game could be defined that way. Now, to be fair, you could argue the reverse, right? Of course, there'd be a lot of non-queer influences that exist, but I mean, they're always pushing and pulling on each other, and it's not just a straight up binary either.
Yeah.
And they end their comment with asking, like, which could be asking yourself when designing a game, is there also a queer dimension to this? I find that really interesting because that's something I've been thinking about a lot. And some of the games I've been working on lately that are in rough stages, but I've been really looking at, are closer to they're angry about something and have a message they want to get across, And while they aren't explicitly about you know queer history, what I'm hoping to do is kind of queer the story and skew how you're looking at it. So while you're playing it, you're like, oh wow, I don't feel like a good person for taking these game actions. These are not good things I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
And it's been, Stonewall really started that, but like seeing the response to that and just working on games past that, it's interesting to um to kind of play around in that space because I feel like a lot of games ignore it. A lot of games are unwilling to make the players feel these strong emotions, even though that's one of the strongest things we have as designers is to make players feel an emotion.
Yeah.
Um, that was the end of my thought, but I see a lot. I see a lot of people typing, which is always nice to have.
Okay.
Um, and uh, and then I saw Mark Johnson say up above. Um, let's see. It was about how their adult trans daughter group is a video gamer, and she identifies with the Metroid series through the central character Samus. As subtle as that, it made a difference for her, which makes them wonder if seeing just little things like player markers or roles that can be non-binary are way more significant than we may realize.
Oh, I mean, I think so. I do think the representation matters. I do think seeing people that look like you, and more importantly, also are able to like reflect some aspect of experiences you might have will definitely help people, see themselves and be strong points of identification. And I feel like that's definitely something that it definitely matters and definitely needs doing, you
Yeah.
know. Um, Something I'm actually I've been quite happy with the last few years because, like, I grew up in the '80s, and in the '80s when I was a child, the cartoon series were not great for representation. But today, there's lots of stuff that's being made for kids that reflects the diversity of ways to be and experiences, and as characters that they can identify with. And I think that's so tremendously important, actually.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
You know?
I think you're dead on there for sure. There is a lot more options now, and I remember growing up because I grew up in the '90s, um,
You
and
make me feel old.
and I don't mean to, I swear. And I remember, growing up and going through my, even my teenage years and seeing characters and I'm like, "Oh, wow. Like that's pretty cool. That's neato to see." Um and, and it's but I still remember seeing hostility. I still remember seeing these issues here and there, and you're like, I'd see them and go, that makes me feel very uncomfortable. But I remember doing research for Stonewall, and I learned about a documentary called "Word Is Out: Stories of Some of Our Lives," and it took me a while to find a good copy of that. But basically, it's a documentary made in New York in the '70s about just queer people. I mean, really queer couples, I guess, is maybe the best way to think about it. But it's and the best thing is the documentarians who made it were queer people. I mean, everyone, top to bottom, it was just a bunch of people making like their little punk thing, and it's really cute to see their stories and kind of sobering and sad because a lot of their stories end up being, I left my husband, or I left my wife to go live the life that I wanted, and the court took away my kids, or maybe they threw their kids with me because they just didn't care, and this is the life I'm living. I'm trying to be as happy as I can. We're real people. These are our real struggles. We are not perfect. We aren't like, oh, we're perfect, so everyone can see how being gay is fine. Um, when in reality, it's just we're like everyone else. We have our own problems. We have
Mhm.
jobs and we pay taxes, and what do we want from us? And after that aired, it's my understanding because there's a at the end of the film after the credits, there's an address that they list, and it's my understanding that when that film was shown nationally on television, I don't know how they got it on national television. Don't ask me that one, but they um they got flooded with letters, just flooded with letters of people who were shocked to see someone like them shown in a neutral, even neutral light, but a neutral to positive light, which had never been done before. At least not on such a wide a scale and so
Yeah.
accessible to the public. And so seeing stories like that really convinces me that yeah, representation is just so important, and it's so easy to um to just overlook and go, oh well, you're non-binary character marker, like whatever. But if that helps someone, then who am I to judge?
Yeah. Exactly.
So yeah, I feel like things like that, you read those and you go, all right, well, it's kind of hard to argue that, to be honest. Um,
Yeah.
let's see. Uh, I want to read Volko's comment. Um,
Okay.
As someone who knows next to nothing about queerness, I'm fascinated by the continuing hostility in my country to what seems to me just folks living in themselves. Yeah, me too. Tell us all about it. Thinking about Taylor saying that playing as the man and Stonewall Uprising should make you feel bad, is there a role for games to examine why people in history today have fought against queerness? Should part of the story be looked into rationales and the point of view of people who think they are good people who get angry about queerness in their society? Um, I mean, I would make the argument my game does that to some degree, like Joe's saying below. My co-designer for the Sacred Band. Hey, Joe. Um, and that game, in that game you can play. You're opposed, but you can play as someone who feels like they're probably doing what's right on some level. I mean, it's hard to believe that they entirely think they're right, because of how loudly immoral and that is currently. I mean, this hasn't stopped. Um, but their goal is to keep the status quo and to do what they want, and it's Pride's goal to stop that, to have other people, the rest of society, see things as they are. And so it is. I definitely think it's a little dangerous to focus story too much on the bigots and why they're bigots. I think it's a
Yeah.
little scary to, and I know I've gotten a lot of flack, mostly privately, about how I showed this or that in Stonewall, and if that was responsible, and if I did this or that right. And I'm sure Amabel gets her own share of that. I'm sure it's not
Yeah.
just me. So it's I think it's really hard and touchy to tell a story like that without having a counterbalance. With a counterbalance, I feel like it's pretty reasonable, but um with it going unopposed, it could be super easy to say, "Oh, well, you're just promoting this point of view, carte blanche." And there are some games that fight against that. Infamous Traffic actually comes to mind, where you're doing bad things, and the game is saying, "Hey, these are your bad things you're doing," and you are strictly speaking unopposed, except by the game system. Um, but especially when it's such a more sensitive topic, I can see that going poorly. But I can envision a game up like it, and I can envision a game like that being done well. But you have to be really on it and your research to make sure you're not misportraying stuff. Because if you do, people will definitely get on you, and for good reason. I mean, these are important stories. I think especially as we're going into their infancy now, doing them right and doing them justice is maybe the hardest part, but maybe the most important part to getting any of it right.
Yeah. And I think one thing is when you're trying to tell the story of the point of view of people who mean well but aren't thinking it through or aren't questioning their bigotries, you run into the kind of the Archie Bunker problem, and I'll just admit I have a lot less patience for that, especially because it tends to be if you look at like newspaper stories, for example, a lot of ink is spilled on why people believe things that aren't true, that are bigoted things, that things that hurt people, and not a whole lot about the people being hurt. So I feel like I have less interest in those kinds of stories. I think, because when I came out, I definitely ran into some people who had problems with it or didn't understand it, and there were some people who use that as an opportunity to ask questions to educate themselves, and some who didn't. And you really can't do it for them. And I don't know how much value there is in understanding. I don't know how much value there is in understanding someone who won't take the time to examine themselves and their priors and their that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point is really valid too, Amabel, where, you know, it's it's so easy to get bogged down in these debates about why people should be treated as people for this, that, or the other trait. But is it worth having that conversation and validating that? That's, oh boy. I mean, that's, it feels like you're going down a, like a spiral at some point downward. Um, and it's just not always productive. And how many people are you really convincing? I'm not saying that convincing doesn't need to happen. Of course, advocacy is really important, but at the end of the day, everyone's at a different level in that pipeline. I feel like a lot of your games are talking, to, I mean, even my game, I guess. They're talking to an audience that is already like, okay, queer people need equal rights, and there's not really a question there. If you're buying Stonewall or if you're buying any of that stuff, I get the vibe you probably already agree with me. I get
I
the
Yeah.
vibe, and part of me wonders what like a middle of the road game would look like. Part of me wonders what a game tailored to convince someone or at least get them to quit. I don't even know what that would look like. I mean, how do you walk that line? How do you stay on that fence
Yeah.
while being respectful?
Yeah, I know with, so when I did This Guilty Land, the game opens in the rule book with, an argument, and the first thing it says is that slavery was bad because it was, and that's the foundational thing. That the game isn't really about that. The game is about, actually that compromise and the middle is bad. But I had people who came at me and said that, it didn't really examine, like, the pros and cons of slavery, and it's like that issue is that is a settled issue for me. There's no, that if I don't feel like if you're someone who has questions about that, a game's not gonna convince you,
Yeah, yeah. I
right?
mean, that's, oh boy.
And so, yeah, so I think the people who are more likely to buy a game like that or a game like Stonewall Uprising probably are starting from the foundational belief that yeah, people deserve equal rights and bodily autonomy, and and um and it's more of like, well, what are we learning about that struggle and the ways in which that struggle is still ongoing,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I think it's always important to remind people of that too. To let them know, hey, this is not a settled, maybe where you live, maybe the friends you have all agree, but unfortunately, it's still not a settled, discussion, which is abhorrent, but that's,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, let's see. So there's that. And I remember demoing Stonewall at what Origins? When we were just before it was out. And you'd see people walk the halls, and I remember seeing people, not many to be fair, maybe once or twice, but I remember seeing people like scoff, like openly look at the game. They look at all the pride flags on the covers because we had the different covers of the pride
Mhm.
flags. And there was at least one or two couples where they looked at the game, kind of like scoffed, like, wow, a game like that exists, wow. And then they'd keep walking. And I didn't feel like it was my uh like it was reasonable to run up to them and tell them why they were wrong, or tell them why they
Yeah.
were living incorrectly, or being holding wrong opinions. It's just not
It's
for
not
them.
and it's not worth your time,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah, like I'm not going to convince someone like that ever. I mean, really, it would be
Mhm.
a pretty serious long con to do that. And it might be easier than I think, but is that really, again, is that worth my time? Is that worth my patience? Is that worth living in Ohio? There's big questions there, and
God, I wouldn't wish living in Ohio on anyone.
so, um, and there's some interesting. I want to go back to the chat. Actually, this is kind of interesting. There's some really fun ideas about modeling. Like having a game where you're fighting evil. This is what Joe, not my co-designer, but someone else mentioned. Although Joe mentioned something similar about you fighting evil, and the nature of the evil is revealed, and it's something that you don't agree with, something that you dislike. you know is there, in the game, do you stop fighting? Do you stop trying to win, once you see the other side of that? um and I
Hmm.
could see something akin to that being modeled in a game, being kind of interesting. Um and and I think part of what makes queer games really interesting to me is examining the unexamined, is examining systems of power and oppression, and not not just glossing it over, but actually looking at what's going on and saying, okay, why are we doing what we're doing? Is this okay? Is this functional? Is this healthy for a society? And I feel like that's the one thing that I keep seeing over and over.
Yeah.
So I think for me, that's just been on my mind about how you approach this stuff, how we broadly approach it, and how again, there's just not one answer. It's something
No.
I think about on the regular, because I see your games, and I see Joe Kelly's game, and I see Zoe's game, and a number of other people, but not a ton. I'd like to see more, and we're all approaching this from a different point of view. There's no one size fits all answer.
And there shouldn't be, because, I mean, that's like a fundamental fact of being queer, is that we each have our own perspective and our own identity and our own approach, and our should have the freedom to live our own lives. And so it makes sense that one size doesn't fit all, because we don't fit in
Yeah, almost
the
definitionally.
standard
Yeah,
size. Yeah.
yeah. I think that's pretty much um, the path forward for a lot of the stuff is just seeing how transgressive we get, and seeing where it goes. I mean, that's one of the nice things, is because it's art. There's not just a path forward, and we just walk that path, and that's how it goes.
Yeah.
I'm frankly very curious where your upcoming queer games will look at and push at.
Hmm.
I
Me
know that.
too.
I mean, yeah, that's part of the. I mean, that's part of working on games. As you know, it's just sometimes you want to see where a game takes you, and I'm frankly really excited to see other games. I've long said I would love to see another game about like the Stonewall Uprising, and the stuff that I've covered, but from someone else. Like I'd love to see what a game
Mhm.
like that would look like. Um, and there's a number of other games that I've worked on that are in various spaces about there's one about the AIDS epidemic that I'm working on, and it's closer to a role playing game, so it's not traditional like board gamey stuff.
Yeah.
um but sometimes I think to have players hit the emotional notes you need, it might be relevant to step out of what might be conventional, especially in a queer game. That's part of the reason I find it really interesting, is because you can knock down some walls. You could really knock down some walls and player expectations. Um, and I'm really excited to see what other games are being made, and will eventually be made. And I'd be honored to be any part of that. Like that stuff really excites me.
Yeah. Me too.
But so I think that might be about our time. I know the panel said like 50 minutes or so on the website.
Okay.
I don't know if there's anything else you want to chat about before we head out. I think we have 5 minutes, strictly speaking, if we just go to the hour. Um, is there anything else you want to bring up, Annabelle, that we didn't touch on?
Um, I can't think of anything in particular. Like, I want to know more about Sacred Band.
Sure. I mean, I can briefly touch on it. Right now, it's still in development. Whirligig is interested in it,
Mhm.
which is awesome, and Joe and I are super excited about that. Um, and so, Sacred Band is a two-player cooperative mirrored deck builder where you and your partner, that's what your the other player is always called your partner, are uh, are fighting through a number of battles in ancient Greece as the Thebans, and um, and basically when every round you set up in Thebes, and then you go off to fight somewhere. Um, and whenever you play cards, you have a hand of six at the beginning of every round, and you put down members of your sacred band. That's what your cards are. They're half of the pairs of lovers, because the sacred band
Mhm.
was all gay lovers, 150 pairs of them. And so whenever you match your lovers, dead on, if right now a lot of them are named after Greek letters for clarity, but if you match gamma with beta, I mean, they aren't lovers, but they'll sure work together. But if you play both deltas or something, they match. You get an Eros, which is a resource, which is funny for a lot of reasons. Um, and also because they're lovers, they're that much stronger together. Their values are additive, and they work together in the battle in a way that typical soldiers can't. I mean, part of the idea behind the Sacred Band broadly is that, as the idea is that if you fought with your lover, you would fight that much harder. If you fought with your lover, you would want to impress them and keep them alive and keep yourself alive for their sake. And so it's kind of tragic and and kind of beautiful in some ways. Um, and so one of the core ideas that Joe and I have played with is the fact that you have mirrored decks, and you're not always gonna have the same hands, so there's gonna be some uneasiness, and you can't just directly communicate because you're in the heat of battle. It's not something you can just do. You can't say, hey, get over here. No, there's a fight going. and um, and it's been really a delight to work on. The funny part of the Sacred Band is that I did not know much about the Sacred Band until Joe Schmidt reached out to me after playing Stonewall, and he loved that game, and he's like, Taylor, we should work on a game. I don't know what yet, but I want to work on a game with you. and, and so, uh, probably like a year later, he goes, Taylor, you should read this book. And if you read this book and you like it, we should make a game about it. And so I read The Sacred Band, which is a book about the topic, and it's really been a delight to work with him. He's a really great designer, and it's been very interesting to see how, because he just does historical games where I design all sorts of weird
Mhm.
whatever stuff. It's not just historical stuff. And so it's been fun to watch our ideas clash in various ways, and usually ways that end up making the game better. So I love you too, Joe. I love you. Um, and so
Aw.
uh, and so yeah, it's been honestly a delight to work with Joe, and I think it's it's very different than Stonewall. Again, it's a two-player co-op. No one's
Mhm.
playing as no one's playing as the Spartans or what have you, or the Macedonians. Um, but I'm really proud of it. I'm really happy with where it's going. It's not quite done yet by any means, but here's hoping it will be soon, and then
Yeah.
Whirly Gig can put it out or whatever.
I would, yeah, it sounds great, and I co-op is h so I haven't done a co-op game yet. I am working on that's my other queer game I'm working
Oh,
on,
cool, cool, awesome.
but, which is, it's a game called Gridlock, and
Okay,
it's about a trans femme biker gang that has trouble getting their engine started,
Oh,
in a
you've made
dystopian future.
yeah, it sounds awesome.
And that's a cooperative game. And there are unique challenges to that because I'm very used to the two-player space, the head-to-head competitive two-player space, and I don't know if I would have done try to do a cooperative game
Mm.
before I figured myself out. Like the number of types of games and the subjects I'm interested in now are so much broader and so much more different than I would have expected, and I am really happy for that.
Me too. Me too. I think stuff like that is great, and it means that not every queer game has to be this like violently angry affair, and it's a little easier to ease people in. Cause yeah, for the co-op stuff with Joe and I, it just felt natural. Sacred Band, your pairs of lovers. Why not
Yeah.
just make that part of the game? Why not just like encourage actual couples to play the game that way? Um, so yeah, that was kind of one of the ideas. Is like this could be a game you play with your partner, literally. Like
Mhm.
it's perfect. So, and my dream is that one day someone will play the game with someone else, and because of the game, they'll end up becoming partners. That is
Oh, that's
like
so cute.
that would be that's my secret dream for it. Um, and the funny thing is, like yourself in some ways, I'm not a big co-op player. A lot of co-ops rub me the wrong way. They just feel like weird puzzles. And so it took a long time to really figure out how I wanted to approach it, and how Joe and I wanted to approach it. Um,
Mhm.
anyway, we're running a bit over time. I
Okay.
think I think that's it. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I'd like to thank you so much, Amabel, for being with me today.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah.
So I appreciate everyone stopping by, and I hope you all have a great rest of your con, whatever panels or games or whatever else people do. Um, enjoy yourself and have a very queer day.
Yes.